My name is Leo Flores, and my life has been a quiet pilgrimage in search of things that last. I grew up in the warm, sun-drenched Oak Haven district, a part of the city where the houses are modest, but the oak trees are ancient and proud. My father, and his father before him, were men who understood the language of wood and steel. From them, I inherited not a fortune, but a philosophy that true value is found not in what a thing costs, but in the love and labor invested to preserve it. My workshop, Oak Haven Restorations, is tucked away on a quiet street, smelling perpetually of linseed oil, metal polish, and the faint, sweet scent of old leather. It is my sanctuary. Here, I don't just fix things, I coax stories back to life from forgotten pieces of automotive history. It was in this sanctuary that I met Clara. She'd brought in her grandfather's old Triumph TR3, a car that had sat rusting in her parents' garage for 2 decades. She wasn't looking for a quick flip or a flashy restoration. She wanted to feel what her grandfather felt when he drove it along the coastal highways. She spoke of him with a gentle reverence that resonated deep within me. Over the months it took to bring the little British roadster back to its former glory, we fell in love. Our love was easy, natural, a shared appreciation for authenticity in a world that often felt disposable. The only part of our life that wasn't easy was her family. Clara was a Claremont, a name that in the city of Port Blossom was synonymous with old shipping money, sprawling coastal estates, and a particular brand of quiet, unshakable social prestige. Her parents, Edward and Isabel Claremont, had never met me, but I knew, through Clara's pained and carefully worded anecdotes, that they had already formed their opinion. To them, a man who worked with his hands was a curiosity, perhaps, but certainly not a suitable partner for their daughter. They belonged to a world of silent transactions, of legacies measured in trusts and endowments, of hands that were kept impeccably clean. My hands, with their permanently etched lines of oil and faint tracery of scars from slipped wrenches, were a foreign, unwelcome text. The inevitable summons came on a crisp autumn evening. "They want to have dinner," Clara had said, her voice small over the phone. "Friday. At the estate. 6 o'clock. There was a fragile hope in her tone that broke my heart. She believed, or wanted to believe, that if they could just meet me, just see the man she loved, they would understand. "It'll be all right, my love," I'd promised, my own heart a leaden weight in my chest. "I'll be on my best behavior." Her relief was a palpable thing, a soft sigh that traveled through the phone. "Oh, Leo. Just be yourself. The wonderful, kind man you are. They'll see it. They have to." But as Friday approached, the quiet pressure began to mount. A follow-up call from Clara was laced with a gentle, nervous coaching that felt entirely unlike her. "Maybe wear the navy blazer, darling? And when Dad asks about the workshop, perhaps you could call it a heritage conservation studio. It sounds substantial." Each suggestion was a small, smooth stone added to the weight in my gut. I understood where it came from, a daughter's love, a desperate desire to bridge 2 worlds she loved. But it felt like I was being asked to sand down my own edges, to apply a veneer of respectability over the solid, honest grain of my life. I was proud of my workshop. I was proud of the calluses on my hands. They were the evidence of a life spent building, creating, and restoring. To hide them felt like a betrayal of the very things Clara professed to love about me. Still, for her, I would try. I would build that bridge. On that Friday, I closed the workshop early. I showered until the scent of metal was replaced with soap and steam. I scrubbed my hands and fingernails with a stiff brush, a futile ritual that left them red and raw, but did little to erase the faint, dark lines that mapped a decade of honest work. I put on the navy blazer, a crisp white shirt, and trousers that felt alien and restrictive. Looking in the mirror, I saw a stranger, a man playing a part, his eyes full of a quiet, sad apprehension. My truck, a lovingly restored 1956 Ford F-100 in a deep forest green, felt like the only authentic part of me as I set out. I had rebuilt its engine with my own 2 hands, stitched the leather on the bench seat myself. It was a rolling piece of my own history, my own values. The drive from the warm, familiar streets of Oak Haven to the Claremont estate in the exclusive enclave of Mariner's Bluff was a journey across a social chasm. The cozy bungalows and leafy public parks gave way to wide, immaculate boulevards, then to winding private roads that snaked through hillsides dotted with houses that were less homes and more architectural statements. High stone walls and impenetrable hedges guarded these fortresses of wealth, whispering of a privacy that bordered on paranoia. The road grew narrower and more scenic, flanked by ancient cypress trees that bent in the sea breeze, their branches forming a canopy overhead. The late afternoon sun slanted through the leaves, dappling the asphalt in shifting patterns of gold. I checked the dashboard clock. 4:30. I was making excellent time. A small knot of anxiety in my stomach loosened. Punctuality, at least, was a virtue I could deliver. It was on a long, graceful curve overlooking a breathtaking expanse of the Pacific that I saw it. Pulled onto the narrow gravel shoulder was a car that made me slow down instinctively. It was a 1958 Mercedes-Benz 300D, the Adenauer Cabriolet model, a four-door convertible of such profound elegance and rarity that it was more a piece of rolling sculpture than a mere automobile. Its body, a stunning two-tone of deep burgundy and cream, gleamed in the sun. But its majestic hood was propped open, and a thin, dispirited wisp of white smoke curled into the pristine coastal air. Standing beside it was an elderly woman. She was a portrait of timeless grace, dressed in a simple but exquisitely cut cashmere coat, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon. There was a look of serene, aristocratic exasperation on her face as she peered into the silent engine bay. She wasn't panicked, merely inconvenienced, as if a trusted old friend had committed an unpardonable social gaffe. A voice in my head, a voice that sounded remarkably like Clara's nervous coaching, screamed at me to keep driving. "You cannot be late. Not today. This is not your problem." It was a sensible voice, a logical one. To stop was to risk everything: my clean shirt, my schedule, the fragile truce I hoped to broker with the Claremonts. But then another voice, a deeper and more insistent one, rose up from the core of who I was. It was the voice of my grandfather, the whisper of the workshop, the quiet creed of the restorer. A thing of such beauty should not be abandoned. A person who looked so utterly stranded should not be ignored. It was a simple matter of human decency, a principle that felt far more important than the crease in my trousers. With a sigh that was a quiet surrender to my own nature, I flicked on my signal and pulled my green pickup onto the shoulder a respectful distance ahead of her. I took off the navy blazer, laying it carefully on the passenger seat, and got out. "Having some trouble?" I asked, my voice calm, hoping not to startle her. She turned, and her eyes, a startlingly clear and intelligent blue, took me in. They registered my clean shirt, my dress slacks, and then the old truck, a faint flicker of surprise in their depths. "It would appear so," she said, her voice possessed of a crisp, cultured warmth with a faint, unplaceable European accent. It made a most undignified sigh, and then simply gave up the ghost. "My driver was meant to be following me with my luggage, but I fear he has taken a more scenic and likely incorrect route. Mind if I have a look?" I offered. "I know my way around these old engines. It's a hobby." The word felt clumsy and inadequate, the first small lie of the evening. She considered me for a long moment, her gaze direct and appraising. It wasn't a look of suspicion, but of genuine curiosity. Then a small, wry smile touched the corners of her mouth. "A man of hidden talents, perhaps. By all means, be my guest." I leaned under the great hood, and the familiar, sacred smell of hot oil, aging rubber, and warm metal enveloped me. It felt like coming home. To my eyes, the engine was not a mystery but a legible text. The layout was immaculate, a testament to German engineering. Within a minute, I saw it. The problem was subtle, something a less experienced eye would miss. The wire leading from the ignition coil to the distributor was old, its insulation cracked and brittle from decades of heat cycles. It had likely shorted against the engine block. It was a simple failure of a simple part, but it was enough to silence this magnificent beast. "I see the problem," I said, straightening up. "It's a failed coil wire. An easy enough fix, but..." I looked down at my clean hands, then at my white shirt. "It's going to be a bit messy." I'll have to splice it, and my hands will get quite greasy. She followed my gaze, and her smile widened. Young man, she said, her blue eyes twinkling with amusement. If you can make this beautiful creature sing again, I do not care if you have to bathe in oil to do it. A little honest dirt is a small price to pay for a rescue. And with that regal permission, I set to work. I retrieved my emergency toolkit from the bed of my truck, a worn leather roll containing the essential, time-tested tools of my trade. As I carefully stripped the damaged wire, my hands, which I had scrubbed so fiercely, became reacquainted with their natural state, streaked with the black, gritty lifeblood of the internal combustion engine. We talked as I worked. She didn't ask about my profession or where I was headed. Instead, she asked about the car. She knew its history, its quirks, the story of how her late husband had bought it for her on their 20th anniversary. She spoke of it not as an asset, but as a keeper of memories. She was sharp, knowledgeable, and possessed a genuine passion that I found deeply admirable. She was impressed by my diagnosis, by the confident and gentle way my hands moved, by the respect I showed the machine. For those 20 minutes, on the side of a sun-drenched coastal road, I wasn't an unwelcome suitor or a blue-collar mechanic. I was simply a man sharing his passion with a fellow enthusiast. When the wire was spliced and securely wrapped in electrical tape, I wiped my hands on an old rag from my toolkit, a gesture so ingrained it was second nature. "All right," I said, giving her a confident smile. "I believe she's ready. Try her now." She slid behind the vast, elegant steering wheel, turned the key, and the engine turned over once, twice, then roared to life with a deep, resonant hum. It was a sound of profound mechanical satisfaction. A genuine, radiant smile of pure joy lit up her face, erasing years and making her look almost girlish. "My dear boy, you are a magician," she exclaimed, her voice full of sincere delight. "A true miracle worker. How can I ever repay you?" The warmth of the moment, the satisfaction of a job well done, was payment enough. "Just knowing she's running is all the thanks I need," I said, feeling a happiness more authentic than anything I'd felt all day. "You have a wonderful evening, ma'am." "And you as well, mister," she prompted, her intelligent eyes holding mine. "Leo. Leo Flores," I replied. "Leo," she repeated, as if committing the name to memory. "My profound gratitude." With a final, gracious nod, she put the car in gear and pulled smoothly away, a queen restored to her chariot. I watched the magnificent burgundy and cream convertible disappear around the next bend, a warm glow spreading through my chest. The glow lasted for approximately 10 seconds before it was extinguished by a sudden, cold wave of horror. I looked down at my hands. They were not just greasy, they were black, the grime worked deep into my knuckles and under my fingernails. A prominent smudge of black decorated the knee of my light-colored trousers where I had knelt. And then my eyes fell on the clock on my dashboard. It was 5:45. I was still a 20-minute drive from the Claremont estate. The dinner was at 6. My heart sank. The careful scaffolding of my plan for the evening, punctuality, cleanliness, respectability, had crumbled to dust on the side of that road. I drove the remaining miles with a sense of quiet, impending doom, rehearsing my apology. "I am so dreadfully sorry. There was a woman, an emergency, a beautiful classic car." It sounded hollow and unbelievable, the kind of elaborate excuse a schoolboy would concoct. The Claremonts, as Clara had painted them, were not people who would appreciate the romance of a roadside repair. They were people who valued order, control, and appearances. I, with my stained hands and my unforgivable tardiness, was about to fail on every conceivable front. The entrance to the Claremont estate was not marked by ostentatious gates, but by two simple, massive granite pillars, a statement of such understated and established wealth it was more intimidating than any iron barrier. The long driveway, paved with fine, white gravel that crunched softly under my tires, wound its way through a landscape of sculpted perfection. Ancient oaks, rolling lawns, and artfully placed flower beds created a scene so flawless it felt less like nature and more like a museum exhibit. Finally, the driveway opened into a large motor court, revealing the house itself. It wasn't a mansion in the modern, garish sense. It was a sprawling, stone and cedar contemporary masterpiece, all clean lines, vast plains of glass, and terrace levels that cascaded down the hillside toward the ocean. Every window was lit from within, casting a warm, golden glow that seemed both inviting and impossibly distant. I parked my humble, hard-working pickup at the far end of the court, next to a sleek, silver Aston Martin and a black Range Rover. My truck, my pride and joy, suddenly looked like a dusty farmhand who had wandered into a royal garden party. For a long moment, I just sat there, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I made a last, pathetic attempt to clean the grease from under my nails with a corner of my shirt, a futile gesture that only made things worse. This was it. There was no turning back. Taking a deep, shaky breath, I got out of my truck and began the long, lonely walk across the pristine gravel to the front door, a massive, imposing slab of solid teak. I pressed the doorbell. The chime was not a sound, but a soft, melodic tone that seemed to hum in the very bones of the house. After what felt like a lifetime, the door swung open. And there was Clara. The fragile hope that had colored her face a few days ago was gone, replaced by a mask of pure, horrified shock. "Leo," she breathed, her eyes wide as they took in the whole sorry picture, my disheveled state, the smudge on my trousers, and, most damningly, my hopelessly stained hands. "Oh my goodness, what happened? Are you all right?" I was so worried I tried calling. "I'm so sorry, Clara," I began, my voice a low, apologetic rumble. "I can explain. I was on my way and there was this woman on the side of the road, her car. But I never got to finish." Two figures emerged from the grand, gallery-like hallway behind her, stepping into the soft light of the entranceway. It was them. Edward and Isabel Claremont. They were exactly as I had pictured, yet more formidable. He was tall and lean, with a mane of silver hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He wore a cashmere sweater draped over his shoulders, a caricature of casual wealth. Her posture was ramrod straight, her dress a sheath of gray silk, her expression one of chilly, bored appraisal. They looked at their daughter's stricken face, and then their eyes moved to me. The cool appraisal hardened into something colder, sharper. It was a look of profound, almost clinical contempt. "So," Edward Claremont said, his voice a low, cutting drawl that was as smooth and as cold as river stones. "This is the restorer." He said the word as if it were something distasteful he had found on the sole of his shoe. "I am incredibly sorry for my tardiness, Mr. and Mrs. Claremont," I stammered, my carefully rehearsed speech dissolving into panicked fragments. There was a woman stranded on the road. Her vintage car had broken down, and I felt I had a responsibility to stop and help her. Isabel Claremont took a half-step forward. Her eyes, the same color as Clara's but lacking all their warmth, raked over my appearance with a look of physical revulsion. They settled on my hands, and a small, cruel smile played on her lips. "Clara told us you were a man who wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty," she said, her voice dripping with a sweet, poisonous disdain. "I see you've made no effort to disprove her." "How quaintly rustic of you." I just stood there, mute, feeling the blood drain from my face. The one-two punch of their snobbery was executed with the chilling precision of a practiced art form. "I think it's best if we postpone this evening," Edward said, his tone one of finality, the tone of a man dismissing a junior employee. He was no longer even looking at me, his gaze was fixed on his daughter. "Perhaps we can try again when your friend feels he can present himself with a modicum of the respect we expect in this house." He then turned his back on me, a gesture of absolute dismissal that was more cutting than any insult. Defeat was a cold, metallic taste in my mouth. I had failed. I had tried to play their game by their rules, and I had lost spectacularly. I gave Clara one last, heartbroken look, a silent apology for not being the man her family demanded, for failing to build the bridge between our worlds. I turned to walk away, to retreat back to the safety of my old truck and my honest life, my future with the woman I loved feeling as cold and distant as the stars beginning to prick the darkening sky. But before I could take a single step off the polished stone porch, a sound drifted up the long driveway. It was a sound I knew intimately, a sound I had heard just an hour before. It was the deep, melodious, and profoundly familiar thrum of a classic Mercedes straight-six engine. A pair of bright, elegant headlights swept across the manicured lawns, illuminating the four of us on the porch in a sudden, theatrical glare. I froze, my hand on the railing, my heart giving a single, hopeful, and utterly bewildered leap. I knew that engine. I knew that car. The magnificent two-tone Adenauer cabriolet glided to a whisper-quiet stop behind my humble pickup truck. For a moment, no one on the porch moved. Edward and Isabel stared, their faces a mask of confusion and annoyance at this unwelcome interruption of their victory. Clara just watched, her earlier despair now tinged with a deep, questioning curiosity. The driver's side door of the Mercedes opened with a soft, satisfying thud. A uniformed chauffeur hurried around with practiced formality to open the rear passenger door. An elegant hand emerged first, pale and adorned with a simple, beautiful sapphire ring that seemed to capture the twilight. Then, slowly and with an unhurried grace, the occupant of the car stepped out. It was her, the woman from the side of the road. Isabel Claremont was the first to find her voice, though it was a high, squeaking sound of utter astonishment that completely shattered her icy composure. "Mother? What on earth are you doing here? And in that old relic? I told you Frederick would pick you up in the town car." The woman, Annalise Dubois, Clara's grandmother, and, as I was about to learn, the true and undisputed matriarch of the Claremont Dubois clan, completely ignored her daughter. Her sharp, intelligent blue eyes, the same eyes that had watched me work with such keen interest, scanned the tableau on the porch. Her gaze took in the rigid, angry posture of her son-in-law, the flustered, guilty expression of her daughter, Clara's tear-streaked confusion, and, finally, my own disheveled, grease-stained form. She began to walk toward the porch, her steps measured and full of a quiet purpose that seemed to make the very air around her crackle with authority. Edward and Isabel, who just moments ago had been the imperious sovereigns of this castle, now looked like two petulant, misbehaving adolescents. Annalise stopped at the bottom of the steps, directly in front of me. Her gaze was direct and unwavering, and it held a hint of something I couldn't quite place. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering for a moment on my stained hands and the smudge on my trousers. A lesser man would have crumbled under that intense scrutiny, but her gaze didn't feel judgmental. It felt analytical, like a master horologist examining the intricate workings of an unfamiliar, but beautifully made, timepiece. Then a slow, knowing smile spread across her face. It was a smile that held a universe of private amusement and a great deal of something else, something I was only just beginning to recognize as respect. "Edward," she said, her voice calm and clear, cutting through the stunned silence like a ship's bell in the fog. "Isabel." Her tone was not loud, but it carried an absolute authority that brooked no argument. "This young man," she gestured toward me with a graceful sweep of her hand, "whom you appear to be in the process of ejecting from your home, just spent the better part of an hour of his valuable time lying on the cold, damp gravel of the Pacific Coast Highway to repair my car, after your ever-reliable Frederick apparently decided to navigate via the stars and got hopelessly lost." Edward finally found his voice, though it was a strained, uncertain croak. "Mother, we had no idea. He arrived over an hour late for dinner, and he's a mess." Annalise cut him off with a soft, dismissive wave of her hand. "A mess," she said, her eyebrows arching with a dangerous, ironic amusement. "This is not a mess, Edward. This is the mark of a man who is not afraid of real work. This is the sign of a man who possesses a skill, a competence that is sadly becoming a lost art. More than that, it is the mark of a man who stops to help a stranger in need, even when it means he will be late for a supposedly important engagement." She then turned her gaze upon her daughter. "It is a measure of character, Isabel, that no amount of inherited money can buy, and a quality which appears to be in desperately short supply in this household this evening." The rebuke was delivered not with anger, but with a quiet, surgical precision that left them speechless and visibly deflated. She then turned her back on her stunned, horrified children and gave me her full, undivided attention. Her smile was now a thing of genuine, unadulterated warmth. "You have my deepest and most sincere gratitude, Leo Flores," she said, using my full name. "You possess a rare and valuable skill, and something even rarer, the kindness to share it without any thought of reward." Then she did something that I believe sealed the fate of the Claremonts' evening. She gracefully ascended the 2 steps to the porch, took my arm in a gesture of unmistakable alliance, and tucked it into her own. Her grip was surprisingly firm, a clear, public declaration. "Come along, Leo," she said, her smile radiating a genuine delight that transformed her entire face. "It seems I have arrived just in time to rescue you from what I am sure was about to be a dreadfully dull and judgmental dinner. You will join me. I find I am suddenly very hungry." As I walked, stunned and in a daze, through the grand-teak doorway of that house, I was no longer a disgraced mechanic. I was an honored guest on the arm of the one woman whose quiet authority could make titans of industry tremble. The interrogation I had been dreading was over before it had even begun. But as I glanced back at the pale, horrified faces of Edward and Isabel, I realized that a new, far more interesting, and, for them, far more terrifying trial was just about to begin. And the judges of my character were now the ones in the dock. The interior of the Claremont house was as breathtaking and as coolly impersonal as its exterior. Vast spaces flowed one into the other, decorated with minimalist art and furniture that looked more like sculpture than something a person would actually sit on. A butler, a man so tall and impossibly thin he seemed assembled from reeds, appeared as if from nowhere in the cavernous foyer. His eyes flickered for a nanosecond toward my greasy hands and trousers, a tiny spark of professional horror, before his face smoothed into a mask of perfect, deferential neutrality upon seeing my escort. "Mrs. Du Bois, a pleasure to see you. We were not expecting you this evening," he murmured, his voice as soft as felt. "A change of plans," Henderson, Annalise replied, her voice brisk and cheerful. "This is Mr. Leo Flores. Please set another place at the table. Next to me. On my right." If a butler could be said to reel, Henderson did. A slight widening of the eyes, a fractional intake of breath, it was the butler equivalent of a gasp. The seat to the right of the matriarch was the seat of honor, a position I would later learn that Edward, her own son-in-law, had long coveted and was rarely granted. We were followed into the dining room by the silent, shell-shocked remnants of the welcoming committee. Edward and Isabel trailed in our wake like a pair of defeated generals, their faces pale and taut with a mixture of fury and humiliation. Clara followed behind them, and when my eyes met hers, I saw a look of such breathtaking, incredulous, and joyous relief that it sent a jolt of warmth straight to my heart. She was seeing the tide turn in the most spectacular way imaginable. The dining room was a study in dramatic minimalism. A single, colossal slab of polished mahogany served as a table, long enough to seat 20. It was set for 5. Annalise guided me to my seat of honor, and I sat down, feeling like a dusty sparrow who had been mistakenly invited to a convocation of eagles. The dinner that followed was the most surreal and profoundly satisfying 90 minutes of my life. It was not a meal, it was a masterclass in the art of quiet, psychological warfare, and Annalise was its undisputed grandmaster. Her strategy was simple and devastating. She focused the entire force of her formidable intellect and charm on me, and completely, utterly, and pointedly ignored her daughter and son-in-law. "So, Leo," she began, after Henderson had poured a deep, ruby-red wine into our glasses. "The 300D. A magnificent machine, but my late husband always said the automatic transmission was its Achilles heel. He found the 3-speed fluid coupling to be sluggish. Do you agree, or was he just an old purist who missed his clutch pedal?" And so I talked. Not as a man trying to impress, but as a craftsman sharing his knowledge. I spoke of the elegant engineering of the post-war Mercedes, the challenges of sourcing period-correct parts, the subtle art of tuning a dual carburetor setup not just by instrument, but by sound and feel. I forgot I was wearing a borrowed blazer and had grease on my hands. I was back in my world, my sanctuary, speaking my native language. And she, this incredible woman, listened with an intensity and intelligence that was both thrilling and deeply flattering. She asked sharp, insightful questions. She shared anecdotes about her husband, a man who, it turned out, shared my own passion for the soul of machines. Across the gleaming expanse of mahogany, Edward and Isabel sat in a state of suspended animation. They were prisoners at their own table. Several times, Edward attempted to steer the conversation back to his own territory, finance, the markets, a recent acquisition. Speaking of long-term value, Mother, he interjected once, his voice a little too loud in the quiet room. The emerging markets fund I mentioned is up 12% for the quarter. Annalise paused, took a delicate sip of her wine, and then turned her piercing blue eyes back to me, as if he hadn't spoken at all. That's fascinating, Leo. Now tell me, the Bosch fuel injection systems from that era, were they as notoriously temperamental as their reputation suggests? The dismissal was so absolute, so complete, it was like he had been rendered invisible. He visibly deflated, his face darkening with a sullen, resentful anger. He did not attempt to speak again for the rest of an appetizer. Later, Isabel made her own desperate gambit, a foray into the realm of domestic excellence. The sea base is simply divine, isn't it, Mother? I had it flown in fresh from the coast of Chile this morning. Annalise took a thoughtful bite, chewed with deliberation, and then placed her fork down. She looked at me, a soft smile on her lips. It's very good, yes, she conceded graciously, before turning the compliment into another weapon. But you know, Leo, the satisfaction of hearing an engine you've just rebuilt catch and run smoothly for the first time, that deep, honest hum of a well-tuned machine brought back from the brink. That, to me, is a far more deeply satisfying flavor. Don't you agree? Yes, ma'am, I said, a slow, grateful smile spreading across my face as I finally, fully, understood the lesson she was teaching. I most certainly do. And so it went. For the entire meal, I was the celebrated guest, the valued expert, the man of substance. And they, in their own multi-million-dollar home, were the silent, irrelevant audience, forced to witness the matriarch of their clan celebrate the very man they had tried so cruelly to cast out. Clara, my beautiful Clara, simply watched me, her face glowing with a love and a pride so profound it made my own heart feel like it might burst. She was seeing the man she fell in love with, not just being accepted, but being championed. As the evening finally drew to a close and Henderson served coffee, Annalise made her final, decisive move. She let a thoughtful silence hang in the air for a moment, then she looked down the long table, first at her silent, humiliated children, and then at Clara and me. It has been a very long time, she said, her voice quiet but carrying an immense weight of history, since I have had a conversation of such substance and integrity at this table. It gives an old woman hope for the future of this family. She then turned her gaze directly to me, a new, sharp, businesslike glint in her blue eyes. Leo, she said. My late husband, Jean-Pierre, was a passionate collector of automobiles. His collection, which includes several truly irreplaceable pre-war European models, has been sitting dormant in a climate-controlled facility on this estate for nearly 20 years. It has been gathering dust, a source of anxiety for the accountants and of complete indifference to the rest of the family. She leaned forward, her expression now one of a CEO making a formal, strategic proposal. No one in this family possesses either the skill or, more importantly, the soul to care for them. She let that statement land with devastating effect before continuing. I believe, she said, a triumphant smile finally breaking through her composed facade, that I have just found the new curator of the Du Bois collection. It is not a job, Leo. It is a stewardship. And I can think of no one more fitting. My own jaw, I am not ashamed to admit, dropped open. Beside me, I heard Clara let out a soft gasp. Edward and Isabel just stared, their faces a pale, horrified canvas of utter disbelief. She hadn't just approved of me. She hadn't just welcomed me into the family. She had just handed me the keys to their most personal and priceless legacy. The greasy mechanic they had tried to throw out had just been put in charge of the family jewels. The profound silence that followed Annalise's proclamation was a living thing. It filled the grand dining room, echoing not with emptiness, but with the deafening sound of the Claremonts' carefully constructed world being dismantled, brick by brick. I looked across the vast mahogany table at Clara. The look of pure, radiant, and victorious love on her face was a memory I knew I would press into the pages of my mind and cherish for the rest of my days. It was more than happiness for me, it was a profound vindication for her. The man she loved, the man her parents had dismissed as an unpresentable tradesman, had just been anointed by the Queen herself. Her father, Edward, looked as if he had been winded. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. Her mother, Isabel, was a statue of pure, frozen horror, her hand holding her coffee cup hovering halfway to her lips. They had been so certain of their power, so assured in their judgment within the walls of their own fortress. Now, they were exiles in their own dining room, their authority revealed as a hollow and brittle thing next to the quiet, solid gold of their matriarch's character. I finally managed to find my voice, a humble and slightly shaky thing that felt too small for the cavernous room. Mrs. Dubois. Annalise. I don't know what to say. That is an astonishingly generous offer. I would be honored beyond words. Nonsense, she said, with a gentle wave of her hand, though her eyes were twinkling with a fierce, mischievous delight. It is not a generous offer, Leo. It is a practical one. I am rescuing a priceless part of my husband's legacy from the cold, clammy hands of people who see it only as an entry on a balance sheet. Her gaze flickered for a moment toward her son-in-law. You, I can tell, see the soul in the machinery. That is a skill that cannot be taught, and a quality that cannot be bought. As Clara and I were finally preparing to leave hours later, after a long and wonderful conversation with Annalise about the eccentricities of the Delahaye chassis and the beauty of a Hispano-Suiza engine, the Claremonts made one last, desperate stand. They cornered Annalise in the grand foyer as I was fetching Clara's coat. Their voices were low, furious whispers, but the house's acoustics were unforgiving. "Mother, you cannot be serious," Isabel hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "You are not actually planning to give this mechanic, the keys to Father's collection. It's a priceless piece of our heritage." Annalise turned slowly to face her daughter. The warm, engaging conversationalist I had spent the evening with vanished, replaced in an instant by a figure of such cold, aristocratic authority that even I felt a chill. "Isabel," she said, her voice like ice. "Let us be perfectly, crystalline clear on this. This family's heritage is not in its cars, or its houses, or its stock portfolios. This family's heritage is meant to be in its character. A quality this young man has displayed in abundance, and a quality you and your husband," she gave a withering glance at Edward, who stood silently beside his wife, "have shown a shocking and deeply disappointing lack of tonight." She let the words hang in the air, each one a perfectly aimed dart. Then she turned to me, as I stood holding Clara's coat, and her expression softened once more. "Leo has my complete and total confidence. He is a man of skill, integrity, and kindness. He is, frankly, a much-needed breath of fresh, honest air in this family. You will treat him with the respect he has more than earned. Do I make myself perfectly clear?" "Yes, Mother," Isabel whispered, her face pale, her eyes finally dropping to the floor in defeat. Annalise then smiled at me, a smile that was both an apology for her family's behavior and a promise of better things to come. "Henderson will have the keys to the West Conservatory garage delivered to your workshop in the morning, Leo," she said. "Go and have some fun." The months that followed were a quiet, steady revolution. Clara and I were married in the spring, in a small ceremony in a grove of redwood trees, surrounded by the people who truly knew and loved us. Annalise stood beside me as my witness. Her parents were there, their smiles tight but their behavior impeccably, almost fearfully polite. The day after we returned from our honeymoon, Annalise, Clara, and I walked to the fabled West Conservatory garage. It wasn't a garage, really. It was a temple. Bathed in natural light from a glass ceiling, sitting on polished concrete floors, were a dozen silent, dusty automotive legends. There was a 1937 Talbot Lego, its teardrop body a masterpiece of French design. A mighty 1931 Bentley blower. A delicate, impossibly beautiful Alfa Romeo 6C. It was a lifetime of passion, a project of pure, unadulterated joy. And it was now my sacred trust. I never again had to call my workshop a heritage conservation studio. In fact, Annalise insisted that Edward and Isabel visit the conservatory. She had me walk them through my initial assessments, explain the intricate work required to bring the Bentley's supercharger back to life, and let them see me in my element, my hands covered in the honest, noble grease of my trade. It was her own quiet, sustained, and brilliant lesson on the nature of true value. One evening, late in the summer, Clara and I took one of the first cars I had fully restored, a stunning 1955 Lancia Aurelia Spider, for a drive along the same coastal highway where my journey had truly begun. The top was down, the sea air was cool and salty, and the engine sang its perfect, intricate mechanical song. My beautiful wife was sitting beside me, her hand resting on my knee, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the setting sun, a look of pure, peaceful contentment in her eyes. I thought back to that first terrifying drive, to the dread and anxiety I had felt, the desperate need to hide who I was in order to be accepted. And I realized the profound and beautiful irony of it all. My salvation had not come from being clean, or punctual, or presentable. It had come from a single, authentic act of kindness and confidence. The act of a mechanic stopping to help a stranger on the side of the road had won me everything. My vindication wasn't in the Claremont's quiet humiliation, but in the simple, powerful truth of that moment. I had not been accepted into this new life in spite of who I was. I had been welcomed, celebrated, and ultimately had triumphed because of it. I had been true to the creed of my grandfather, true to the sanctuary of my workshop, true to myself. And in doing so, I had found not just a new family and a new future, but a deeper, more resonant understanding of my own worth, grease stains and all.